going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in to Brothers of Merit. Taylor.
What up?
What's up, man? We had Kevin Syes on the episode tonight. He's one of our campus pastors here. He is actually in the room giving us the peace sign as we record this intro. So he's the campus pastor at our Westminster campus at Crossroads. So we have had the honor to meet with him a few times now. We were able to get him onto the podcast, and we're stoked that we were able to actually finally get this lined up. I think the interview was pretty unique in what we talked about because it takes it from the ministry view, especially when he grew up through it. We've heard that only a couple of times, I think, out of all the episodes that we've done where we've actually interviewed someone that had a father in the ministry themselves. And he talked about, he mentioned 27 years, which we hit on, but I still think that's amazing because in the same church. And like I said in the interview, like the lives you get to impact and generations you get to impact by doing that's just amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love it. And then we also talked a lot about just like masculinity, and it's just an awesome topic, and we didn't even really dive into it as far as like as soon as we stopped recording, we talked more about it, which is awesome. It just means we're coming back for another episode at some point,
right?
And I think, go ahead.
No, I was just saying masculinity is such an interesting topic in 2019.
About to say the exact same sentence.
You know what I mean? Because I just feel like where we're at in society with masculinity. I just feel like you can find that in Jesus, and we were talking about that earlier. And so many times we try to find that in other external sources that are 100% unnecessary.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not required for you to beat your chest, stand up, and rah, I'm masculine 2019, when you can find your true identity in Jesus, which then helps you find your true identity in yourself and then with your other brothers. You know what I mean?
Or like anything. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like a lot of times, like, I struggle with finding my, like, masculinity or my identity or, like, whatever. Like, I in success at work or in, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like chasing after that or, like, being prideful or whatever. Like, I feel like, I think there's a lot. Like, he said it in the episode, and it's the line. Like, I'll pull it out here now because that like masculinity can be a mask for like actually being a man, the man that you're meant to be, which is looking like Jesus, which is like such a concept that like just like I don't know, I love it, and I think that it's something that definitely I think it's something that's super prevalent to today's world, and I think that it's something that is it's also like kind of underlying, like I'm actually like thinking through it, like processing it, like as we're saying it right now, like it's something that underlying, like we've kind of been saying this entire time. Like you have your friends that you meet at the bar and you talk about the game and you talk about like, oh, what do you do for work and like how's work, and like complain about your boss and talk about how good Lamar Jackson is, like shout out Ravens, they're winning right now on Thursday Night Football, like
LJ.
But like we've always said that, like that's like the friends you already have, right? Like that's the mask of what being a man looks like. It's going out and drinking beers and staying out too late and doing whatever. But like what it really looks like is trying to look like Jesus every day.
Right.
And the best way to do that is to have guys walking alongside you that are encouraging you to do that.
Exactly.
I actually heard today, there's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone, and if you want to go far, you go with others. And
okay,
like I think it's almost that. Like that's almost that, right? Like if you want to be like masculine, you go alone, and you like beat your chest, and you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and you go do everything that we've talked about.
But there will come a time where that's not enough,
right? But life's not a race where you want to run fast.
Yep.
And if you want to go far and you want to like do it well and you want to like get to the end
and
like,
maximize,
well done, my good and faithful servant, do it with others.
Yep.
That's
and guys, we're not sitting here saying there's things wrong with
100%.
going out and having beers with your brothers and all, but you have to just take that next step. That's what we've talked about since day one, which is almost a year ago now. Like that's been since day one, and it'll continue to be. Like, you have to take that next step in your faith and with those brothers. So let's send it in. Let them listen to the episode.
Heck yeah, we'll see you on the other side.
All right, Mr. Kevin Syes, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Good. Taylor?
Doing well. What up?
Not much.
What's going on?
Not much. We have Mr. Kevin Syes on tonight, guys. He is one of our campus pastors here at Crossroads at the Westminster campus. So we want to get right kind of into it and let the listeners hear, who he is. So if you could, Kevin, just tell us a little bit about your background and your testimony, your bring up.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home, but just barely. My parents kind of say, had I been born just a little bit earlier, my experience would have been very different. They had kind of a really sudden conversion after kind of moving through almost like a party lifestyle.
Okay.
In the 70s, and then met Jesus, and then had me a little bit after that. So, around like first grade, my dad started thinking about ministry actually, and so he moved the fam. We went to Virginia Beach for a couple years, and he went back to school, and then came back. And around first grade, my dad was a pastor, which was like, okay, this is kind of interesting,
Sure.
Total change there. So then moving through, my life, I accepted Christ early, but I don't think I really had any concept of what that meant at all. And I think later on, middle school, high school, I got to the point where having been in church my whole life, I guess the classic PK syndrome,
right,
which is really not, it's actually a little bit scary because I'm now a pastor, so
right,
it's coming back.
Your
It's
kids
coming back,
yeah.
but and so I walked away from my faith, really. At least I walked away from the church, and I started just doing the high school party scene and popularity and friends and girls and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what life was about for me in high school. And then I had a friend who we used to hang out a lot, but his parents, for some reason, still made him go to youth group, which I had totally given up on senior year.
Okay.
But I felt bad for him that he had to go. And so on Wednesdays, I'd be hanging out with this guy, and he'd be like, man, I got to go to youth group. And I'd be like, that is super lame, but I guess I'll go with you. And so I went, and I just met all these guys that, seemed to actually really care about me. They were real. They would tell stories about their lives that kind of, made me lean in. And I went on a retreat, and really that was the time where it clicked for me. And I feel like I had a much different understanding of who Jesus was, really met him. He wasn't just, the person who took away my sins and my ticket into heaven. He was a friend. Yeah. He was Lord. And so my life changed drastically after that. I went through middle school, high school, even elementary school. Didn't really like school that much.
Who does?
Yeah, but I didn't think I even really wanted to go to college or anything like that. I mean, I just kind of was like, I think I'm going to check out after this. I'm going to do something else. And I got like C's, I got D's, I didn't have great grades in middle school, high school, and I went to college and just totally different student, totally different outlook. Started kind of getting better grades and started serving, and I started serving in a student ministry there just because I was like, I guess that's what you're supposed to do if you're like a Christian now or whatever. You're supposed to find somewhere to serve. Yeah. And it seemed like middle school, high school students was like the obvious choice. So I started hanging out with middle school, high school students in the student ministry there, and I was shocked at how much I loved it. I just felt like that was a place I came alive. That was a place God had gifted me. It just was easy. It was natural. A lot of really cool stories, just the way God used me through those years. And then that's when I started thinking, this was like, the irony of this. It was a really weird conversation when I told my dad, I was like, I think I'm actually considering ministry. Like, I feel like maybe God's calling me. Okay. And because for years, I think literally the last job on the planet I would have thought I was going to do as pastor. If you had asked me in middle school, high school, as a high school student, I would have been like, nope. There's just zero chance. Right. But here I am. So, and through that, I met my wife. We have 2 kids. And life is good, man. I've been doing ministry now for, I don't know, like 15 years, something like that.
Wow,
that's awesome.
So what do you think really drew you towards those men in that youth group? Like, what was it about them that you saw completely different from what you were experiencing in your current life at that moment?
Sure.
Yeah, I think I just remember them being authentic with me, like honest about their experience, their mistakes. They weren't like trying to pretend like they were perfect. They were just talking about grace and the mistakes they had made. I remember one thing in particular that kind of really stood out to me was a conversation where a guy talked about how the hardest conversation he ever had to have was with his wife before being married, and letting her know that he hadn't been able to maintain his purity up to that point, and like how hard that was. And I was like, wow, that guy's being real. I mean, he's talking about this conversation between him and his wife, and like this guy's for real, you know?
Sure. That's different than the other circles that you're rolling in, like
Right.
that are out partying and doing stuff.
Totally. Yeah.
And it makes you realize, like, wait, this isn't just your ordinary, like, group together. We're just getting together on a Friday night. Like, this is legit. Like, we're actually utilizing our time and wisely and actually really digging into life.
Yeah, I mean, you know, suddenly it wasn't just something I heard in terms of, like, you know, hey, love, caring for each other. I was like, okay, that's fine. We're going to talk about that on a Sunday.
Sure,
These guys
sure.
actually lived it out. You know, they would come and they'd call me up. They'd come pick me up. It was just a different picture. And for me, really, it was a picture of what Jesus looked like. It was Jesus with skin on. This guy was really giving me a picture of what that could look like. So
Yeah, that authenticity is, I think, is key. There's also, I think, a lot to unpack there about like the fact that like you accepted Jesus when you were like a kid and it didn't really necessarily stick until like that's also my testimony. I feel like you hear that a lot of people that kind of grew up in like our generation. There's a ton to unpack. I think it's really a different episode for a different time. But that's been like something that's been like kind of not necessarily on my heart, but just something I've been thinking about. Like, I don't know, just almost like how we like just being careful of how we present the gospel, because I think a lot of times I got scared into it, and it's not. You know what I mean? Like that's not necessarily how it should be.
Right.
I mean,
But that's a side note. Just ignore that.
I mean, I think I was on board with grace. I just wasn't on board with like changing my lifestyle or
Sure.
or you know any of the other things that come along with that. And so you know that's a whole nother question. I mean, just in terms of kind of conversion and what does that mean? I mean, that is a whole different topic. But I mean, I think. You know, I don't think necessarily, honestly, I think there is a line where, you know, you either believe and you have faith or you don't. But it is, I think, a little bit deeper than sometimes we give it credit for.
Right.
Yeah. So let's transition now. So let's fast forward some through the years of middle school and high school. You got to those college years and you start serving with the middle school and high schoolers. Where'd that transition happen where you went from serving the youth to now you're a campus pastor of an entire congregation? Like, it's not just youth anymore. What did that transition look like?
Yeah, I mean, it was, so my first couple kind of jobs in ministry, callings in ministry were strictly student ministry. My first pastoral position, it was like a church of 150 people. They were like, you know, we've got 5 high schoolers. You want to go hang out with them? And, you know, God showed up, and before we knew it, we had a little basement that they were letting us meet in the basement of the church. And I was like, do we have anything bigger than this basement? Because it's getting tight. We got too many kids coming now. And so that was kind of the start of that. And then, you know, a couple years later, I started as a youth and young adult pastor. And so young adults, that was just, you know, into the early 30s or whatever. So that was kind of one step in that direction. And then following that, I was at a multi-site church in Pittsburgh, one of the, it's just probably the biggest church out in Pittsburgh, I would imagine. And I did student ministry at one of the campuses, and then I did what they called the Worship Cafe, which was like a multi-site venue location, and I was the pastor to that community, which was basically like a campus pastor to a smaller community there, campus venue. So that was great experience in that way. And then came to Crossroads, and I started out kind of helping reset the student ministry a little bit at Crossroads, and then just kind of kept growing and stepping into different things. And here I am, man. It's been awesome. I'm so grateful. I love it. I wouldn't do anything else. Don't tell anyone, but I'd do it for free if I was independently wealthy. I just, I mean, who gets to say that you do what you do even if you weren't getting paid? And I don't take that for granted.
Now,
I love that.
How long? Let them know how long you've been here now.
It's been a little more than 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
It feels like it's been longer than that.
I was thinking the same thing.
That's awesome. This is kind of a weird question, but I was just thinking through, like, as a campus pastor, like, you preach on Sundays, you're building relationships with people, you're growing leaders, you're meeting with staff, you're meeting with, you're counseling people. Like, there's tons of, like, facets of what you do. Like, what's, like, your favorite part of being, like, a campus pastor? I think you do it all very well. Like, I will say that. Yep. You're awesome to listen to from the stage. I think you do. You do everything awesome. So I'm just as a side note, you're great at everything. Thanks, you do. I think God's blessed you with a lot of that. But just, I don't know. Like, what's your favorite part of what you get to do?
People is the best part of ministry. It's what makes it worth it. Honestly, like, I love all parts of ministry. I love the leadership stuff. I love the strategic stuff. I love staff development. I love preaching. I love that side of it. But, for me, like, the reset button is, and like the reminder of why I do what I do is when I sit down across the table from someone and have a coffee, or, they sit down in my office and they share what's going on in their lives. Like, for me, that's what it's about. And so, sometimes I kind of jokingly say this. I think it's true. The best part of ministry is people. The worst part of ministry is people. Sure. But it is, it's all joy. It's all blessing. And I just really love connecting with, that's what Jesus did, right? I mean, it was all about people. We make it more complicated than that. But at the end of the day, the way Jesus showed us ministry, it was hang out with people, invest in them. And it's not just something that you do here and there. It's just a lifestyle approach that he took to being with the guys that he was with, the 12 disciples. So
I like that a lot.
Why do you think you resented ministry so much when you were younger? Was it because of your father, or moving, how busy he was? Like, what made you?
I think that's a great question, and
question.
I think
sorry to.
No, I think it's a
That's
great.
good.
No, it's really good. My dad. If my dad was here, if I could just act like my dad for a second, he would say, "Oh, absolutely, it was the way that I did ministry. Probably
Really
caused some of that." And I think he's probably harder on himself than
Sure.
I am on him at times. But I mean, there's some truth to that. I mean, he was the care and counseling pastor, so I just remember getting phone calls in the middle of dinner time. It was back in the day when you had the home phones and voicemail and everything.
The corded phone.
The corded phone in the kitchen, and all of a sudden someone's voice would be, in the kitchen, and they'd be in desperate trouble with their marriage, and my dad would be like, "I gotta go right now." So that stuff happened growing up, which was hard. But at the end of the day, I think I want to kind of pivot and say this too. Like, my dad is also really my hero, because I think we're probably one of the hardest parts of ministry and most underrated parts of ministry. No one really talks about it all that much, is finishing well. If you just look at the statistic of guys that are in ministry, just people in ministry in general, I think it's a third of them finish well. Third. I mean, that's just insane to say out loud. I mean, 66% of people in ministry are going to burn out. They're going to have moral failure. They're going to just feel like they can't do it anymore for whatever reason, in an unhealthy way. And so my dad, 27 years in ministry at the same church, is a success story. It's pretty cool.
Heck yeah.
Holy smokes, 27 years at the same church.
That's it, man.
I think the awesome part about that is the community that you grow and the relationships you build. I mean, when you're talking 27 years, you're talking generationally impacting families, not just like I'm here for 5 years, I meet them. Like we're talking, you counseled the parents, and now you could be potentially counseling the newlywed couples of those kids.
Yeah,
and
I'm
that's
friends with a lot of them that has been true for. So
when you sit back now and you look back at those phone calls that came during dinner, you know, it sucks during. When you sit back and look at it from the high view, it's like maybe it was worth it. You know what I mean? Like,
no doubt.
And of course, we all spiritually mature, and we mature just in life in general. So it's easier for us now to take that back view and be like, oh yeah, it is. But wow, 27 years. That's amazing.
Yep. It is amazing.
I love it.
That's my goal, man. That's my hope. That's my desire. And I think what you said is true too. You know, I talk about in ministry, it's like we talk about producing fruit, and the best fruit is produced with deep roots, and deep roots doesn't happen overnight. Deep roots happen when someone's been there for a long time. Yeah. You know, even if you're to kind of go the analogy of wine, like, you know, the old vines are the vines that have been planted for the longest period of time. And the reason that people love wine that has been produced by old vines is because the roots have gone so deep that they're pulling nutrients that are shaping the flavor of that wine. And I just, I think that's a great picture of ministry too. So
that is, I love that. And that's, I love it. I feel like I had a point there and I forget what it is, so we're just gonna move on.
Well, trust. I mean, a lot of it also comes down.
Oh, I got it now. I remember.
Comes to trust. Well, see, I knew that. That's why I was.
Yeah, thank you. It wasn't trust, but no, like I also love like tying in like the finishing well part to that. Like it's one thing to be like, oh, congratulations, you've been in the same job for 27 years.
Right.
Like you weren't one of the 66. Like it's even more impressive when it's ministry. But like when you're doing it like well. Right, like I've said this about like my marriage. Like I want someone, like when it comes to like, oh, like our 25th wedding anniversary, I don't want it to be like, congratulations, like you made it, you didn't get divorced, right? Like you're still here. Like I want it to be like, oh, like they have and they like are finishing well, like they're thriving in the marriage.
Yeah, that's
you know
good.
What I mean? Like,
that's good.
It's like 25 years of like a marriage that I want it to look like, or like, you know, like 27 years at a church, and it's ministry that I want to have my ministry look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same. I mean, because ministry is relationship. So what we just talked about is true in any relationship. Anyone that you're investing in, and the more that you're invested in them and in that relationship, you know, the deeper the roots go. And so, absolutely for marriage and in other jobs. I mean, you know, if you're in the spot that God's calling you to, then what you're doing is a calling. And so whatever that is, do it to the best of your ability and do it to honor and glorify God. And you're going to do it in a way that, you know, at the end of the day, you can finish well and feel good about what you did. So,
heck yeah.
So, and talking about relationships, so I kind of want to tie this a little bit into Christmas, because obviously we're in that time of year, the holidays.
But yes, we are. It's coming fast.
It is
hard and fast.
It is coming.
Have you got your shopping done?
Brittany. That's my shout out to my wife. I'll just leave it at that. Maybe not.
We're hoping.
God bless my wife.
We're hoping she did.
God bless my wife, because
for Amazon.
Yeah. Oh, they are coming here. Walmart, Amazon. But so in ministry, what you do and relationships between men, because that's obviously what we talk about here, Brothers of Merit, a lot. In the holiday season, a lot of times you see, you know, depression or things like that, of where men, we talked about passivity earlier, about like men just don't want to stand up. They don't want to come out and say, you know, I either have an issue or I need somebody to bond with, or I need someone to talk to. Like, have you seen any in your pastoral background that relationships have really been affected by men not reaching out to other men at times like this, like in this season particularly?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I just think it's a trend all the time. I think that certain seasons kind of bring to the surface issues that are going on all the time. And Christmas and just holidays in general are just a time that it's not like it causes the issue; it's the thing that brings the issue to the surface. And I think I think a lot of guys, I think this is a Thoreau quote, they lead lives of quiet desperation, and that quote kind of sticks with me. I just think that's true. I think just Christmas happens to be the thing, and sometimes the holidays are the thing that kind of start to bring it out of the surface for whatever reason. So I talk to a lot of guys in my ministry, and I have the privilege of meeting with guys, and they kind of share what's going on underneath the surface, off the radar, the things they don't really want to talk about with other people sometimes. And I just see it as a theme in general, that's true. And, I'm hopeful, but I'm also kind of at the same time, I think the task in front of us when it comes to what men are facing today is kind of daunting, actually. We're in a unique time and season when it comes to men trying to find their way and what that looks like. And I think it's causing a lot of problems. A lot of the things that we see in society, we're kind of wondering where it comes from. I think a lot of it's under the surface. And so I see it in windows and conversations. And a lot of times, guys, it comes out in their marriages, failed marriages, struggling marriages. It comes out in just depression. They feel like they're just kind of robots going through the motion. They come home, they feel like they're zombies. They're not emotionally connected. There's just all kinds of things. And I think there's some problem underneath the surface that I think has always been there, but I think it's grown really over the last 20, 30, 50 years.
Man, I think today's society doesn't, I'd say, necessarily help that any, because I don't know. And this might sound cliche, but you can sit behind a technologically, capable device rather than actually confronting a friend or a brother in person about something. And I feel like that always limits the depth that you'll be able to reach. It takes away that.
Right. That passivity, I think, it's just such a prevalent thing. I feel like we talk about this often. Like it's so easy to be passive, right? Like that zombie, like while you don't want it, and while it's something that you're gonna go to your pastor and say, like, I need, to be better about this, and whatever.
Right.
It's easy. Like that's the easy choice. Like it takes no effort to be passive.
Yeah, that is the
right.
That is actually the definition of it, right?
Right. So it's that's the default. That's the default behavior that happens when life gets even a little bit hard. I guess I don't know. Like it's easy.
Sit back
to do nothing. It's easy. And it's hard to engage. It's hard to be emotionally connected. And not necessarily hard. It just takes effort. It takes intentionality. It takes. Not being passive.
Right. But it only gets easier if you make that first step. You know what I mean? And that's what we like to strive here for, is to get men to take that step. Because once they do, and you realize how easy it can be to actually talk to somebody you trust, and that goes back to the relationships that we've talked about in this interview. When you build that trust with someone, it becomes much easier to actually have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, passivity is really, in a way, like one of men's, if not man's, primary weakness is actually passivity. Like you think back to the garden. I mean, it started there. This was the problem from the very beginning. I almost kind of wonder sometimes, like maybe passivity was actually the first sin, because Adam and Eve sitting there, and Eve is deceived. But I always, you hear this question asked, but I think it's like a very real question. Where was Adam? Where was he in that moment? He was not there. He was passive. That was, I think, really the start of it in a lot of ways. And so
he was sitting on the couch playing Angry Birds on his phone.
Right, something exactly
though. Every time.
Right.
I'm not serious. And I had this conversation with a guy. His marriage was struggling. We had this exact conversation, and I loved his response. It kind of cracked me up. He's like, I always thought about this. He's like, I don't know why Adam just didn't get out the chainsaw and cut that sucker down. What was he thinking, man? He said, God said, don't eat from the tree. It's a bad tree. You get the axe out. What is that tree doing in the middle? It was on the honey-do list. He did not do it.
Yep.
Well, because he was too busy in Angry Birds
He was too busy being
to
passive.
acknowledge he had a honey-do list.
I'll buy that. I think that's actually probably I think there's a lot there, like that passive being, like, I don't know. That's interesting. I like that a lot. I don't like it, but the thought of that is very interesting.
I thought you were about to say there's a lot there by chopping down a tree. Yeah, okay, yeah.
There is a lot
The
there.
lesson learned: always have a chainsaw on hand.
I think it's a real. It's a rabbit hole. I mean, to kind of dig into it. I mean, in Scripture, there's a thread there throughout Scripture that you could look at, and really, C.S. Lewis talks about this too, and it's kind of an interesting. It's an interesting thing that he discusses in The Abolition of Man. And this is, it's kind of a dense book, but he really digs into this in the first chapter of The Abolition of Man, and he kind of talks about the difference between a man being connected to spirit or connected to kind of the animal side. He talked about it as being cerebral or visceral, and this is a bit of this get kind of deep here, but in a nutshell, the idea here is that honestly, for many guys, they get stuck in their heads, in the cerebral, and their reason and their thoughts, and they're not connected to their emotion, they're not connected to their passion, they're not connected to their heart. And that's if you look even in culture, there's kind of two pictures of men. On the one hand, there's like the idea of a man who is, like the superhero soldier kind of guy who's almost overly aggressive most of the time. And on the other hand, you've got like the cartoon character sitcom dad who's like super passive, right? And so that's connected to living out of either kind of your head, the cerebral part, or your stomach, the visceral part. And C.S. Lewis in that book, it's pretty amazing. I think it's a great read if you can get through it and kind of understand it. His whole thing is, to live out of both sides of that, you need to have a heart that you're connected to your heart. And for me, a perfect picture of this is Jesus. I mean, Jesus lived this out in a way 100%. No one else did. So I just love that. I love that Jesus is a picture of what that should look like.
I love that too, and I think that, I think it's it's interesting because like it's very prevalent to see like there's lots of like people, I don't know why I'm thinking specifically of like Instagram right now. There's lots of like other like podcasts and things like that. I'm not saying anything bad about them, but that are like, we need to like reclaim manhood, and we need to like, and they like are almost painting the picture of like that far right side of like, to be a man of God is to be that superhero, like, whatever. And I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, but like to be that middle, like that heart connected, like what Jesus looked like. I think that like why we exist and why we're doing that is we're saying like, to be the man that God created you to be, to look like Jesus, it's not trying to look like a superhero. It's trying to look like Jesus, and the easiest way to do that is to be connected to other people alongside of you that are pushing you to be like that.
That's it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So like to kind of like tie into like, just for the essence of time, to wrap into like almost like the end here, like we always ask, your advice on brotherhood. So I guess we'll ask that question here now. So do you have any... if you could just leave us with, like, for us, for me, for Brandon, for everybody listening, like, what is your advice on just the topic of brotherhood? And as we try to be those men that are trying to look like Jesus and not trying to be men that are just be better. I guess that's it. Like, I think there's lots of times where like, oh, you're going to be a better man if you make healthy life choices, or you're not passive or whatever.
Right.
And maybe you will, but I think that's a byproduct of looking like Jesus every day is actually the goal.
Yeah, there's more to it. Yeah, definitely.
So what would your advice be on like just brotherhood and that topic?
I mean, kind of connected to the theme that we've already been talking about, passivity. I mean, I think the easiest thing for most men is to not connect with other guys in a way that's actually, most guys connect with other guys at the shallowest level, and that's kind of what they're comfortable with. We're going to talk about sports. We're going to talk about MMA. We're going to talk about whatever.
Yeah,
and
what
those
do you
are
do?
Yeah. And those are all great. I mean, that's fine.
The weather.
But there's got to, for a brotherhood to happen, you have to take a step towards a deeper relationship, and it starts by masculinity can be a bit of a mask if we're not careful. It can be the thing that you almost kind of cover yourself with if it's not authentic masculinity. And so a lot of guys kind of put that mask on, and they're unwilling to be real with each other. And so I think that's the biggest thing. You got to find places, you've got to find guys, and you've got to be intentional about walking that direction. And it's not the first reaction for most guys. The first reaction is to stay isolated at home, and then you're going to lead a life of quiet desperation, and that's where that comes from. So it takes guys to call out that kind of side of who we are. You have to have another guy in your life. Iron sharpens iron, right? So
yeah, another guy challenging you, because I've said it in the past couple of episodes, you have to get uncomfortable to become comfortable. Like that's how it is.
That's it.
Dig into it. So I want to reverse the roles that we usually do, Taylor. We'll reverse the not script, because we never write anything down or follow a script, but what we usually do. If you had to drink one milkshake right now, what flavor would it be, Kevin?
Banana.
Just banana?
Banana. Yeah, just banana.
Okay.
A great banana milkshake is hard to beat. I know it's kind of, it's a little bit under. It's
out there.
It's a little, yeah. You might not expect that, but I've had some killer banana milkshakes, and you can do them poorly, and you just need to run in that case. But if they're done well, I go back every time.
What about a chocolate peanut butter banana? Have you ever had one of those?
Sign me up. Sounds great. I think I probably have at some
I feel
point.
like Chick-fil-A has a really good banana milkshake. I think they used to. They don't.
Sonic brings it.
Ooh.
Sonic brings
Sonic.
it.
Uh-oh. Local to Westminster, too. Might have to go test that out.
I think Chick-fil-A's had Nilla wafers in them. It was awesome.
There you go.
All right, we're making everyone hungry. So
I know.
Kevin, thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, my
you.
pleasure.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much.
inviting me,
Thank you.
guys. This has been good.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Love what you're doing. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
All right, so there you have it, guys. There's our interview with Kevin Syes, our campus pastor here at Crossroads. As you heard now, how good it was and how deep we kind of got in a short time. There was much more that we could have unpeeled from that interview, and we talked about that at the end. But I feel like we hit on just enough to keep the listeners thinking like, oh, I should probably go look into this a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
That book by C.S. Lewis, Abolition of a Man, it's definitely I think something that I'm going to try to pick up. I think it's something that we would recommend. And it's something that watch out for future season, and we'll have Kevin back on, and we'll dissect just that topic by itself a lot further, because I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it's a book actually we could probably put in our fireside studies, because we were talking about that last episode, so we'll just briefly hit on that for you guys.
Transition.
You like that? You like that? I've been working on them.
We didn't even drop the name last time, did we?
No, we just did. Yeah, so the fireside studies. So that's going to, you guys are aware of that now, because we talked about it briefly last episode about the season 1 series. So obviously we're going to create one for season 2 as well. So we'll add that book to that list. So I'm looking forward to season 1 getting released. So you guys should definitely keep your eyes peeled for what's going to be coming about that on our YouTube channel and all.
Yep, yeah, and we'll talk about it further. Once this season is done, we'll talk about actually just that later in the coming weeks of season 2. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
This season 2 being finished. Because we want to get, it's almost like season 1 went so long with 34 episodes that we're resetting a little bit. This is a shorter season, and then we're going to jump into, like we mentioned last week, the cadence of season and then study. And so, as Brandon just said, that's going to be the fireside studies, where the concept of that is it's really just like a curriculum that goes through the library of what we have through season 1, as well as scripture and the blogs that got written by John and things like that, that are like gas on the fire of your conversations with the groups of guys that you've been having. So the concept being, you listen to this, you've been inspired that you need to take concepts beyond just whatever the game was, and so you decide you want to meet with somebody and you want to actually have conversations that of value and of authenticity, like we just talked about here in this episode. And these are just some talking points,
The materials to help you do that.
to get you started on that.
Yep.
You can talk about the topics that we talk about, which we're reveal at a later date.
Absolutely. We're stoked for it. You guys are going to love it. It was really good. I'm ready to get them out there.
Yeah,
so
I'm pumped.
until next week, we'll see you guys later.
See ya.
See ya.